In the previous lecture, we looked at feature selection, which is the process of selecting some features to retain while discarding others that we are not interested in. Feature extraction is different because with feature extraction, we don't retain individual features. We transform the features and obtain new features that may be more useful. I'm going to give you two examples of this: principal component analysis and self-organizing maps, so two approaches to extract features. There are many different ones, and in a few weeks we'll look at, in the context of dimensionality reduction, we will take a look at manifold learning in more generically and other methods for this. And then I'm going to give you an example of possible application of feature extraction, but the main goal here is just to give an idea of what feature extraction is and what we can use it for. So the idea is to derive useful features from data. This can be structured data that is too large, or we have lots of dimensions and we don't want to use everything, or it can be unstructured data like images, sounds, documents with words and so on. And we want to transform that data into a useful data set for solving some particular problem. We want to do classification, or we want to do clustering or something like that, and we could use a neat table with the same number of features for all examples, etc. So we may need to do some transformation like this. One classical and general solution for this kind of problem, when we have lots of features and we want to reduce them to a subset, but not by selecting a feature, individual features, but by combining them and produce a smaller number, more useful features, is principal component analysis. So this is the main idea is to find a rotation and a projection of our data that retains as much as possible the variance or the dispersion of our points. So basically we're going to find an orthogonal base of coordinates, a set of vectors that are perpendicular to one another, such as that the first vector is pointing in the direction where our data is most dispersed. The second vector is perpendicular to the first and pointing to the remaining direction where we have most of the remaining dispersion, and so on and so on. So if we keep the k first vectors, we reduce the dimensionality of our data to k dimensions while retaining as much as possible of the variance of the dispersion of our points, using this linear transformation, this rotation and projection. So let's illustrate this with a simple toy data set. So this is a cloud of points in 3 dimensions, and we can see that there is a diagonal here which is the direction in which they are most dispersed. So there is an axis here where we have the largest variance in our data. And we want to reduce this 3-dimensional data set to 2 dimensions using principal component analysis in order to preserve as much as possible of the variance in our set of points. So the way this is done, I'm going to show you step by step. You don't need to actually memorize the formula and the different steps, but this is just so that when you use the PCA object in scikit-learn, it's not just a black box and you know what's happening. So we are going to compute the scatter matrix, and this is done by looking at the vector from the middle of our cloud of points, the midpoint, so the average of all the coordinates, to each individual point. So you can imagine that there is a vector from the midpoint to this point and another from here to this, and so on. So we have this set of vectors issuing there from the center. So these are those vectors, the difference between each point and the mean of all the points. And if we multiply the vector by its transpose in this way, we get a matrix with a square matrix that has the same number of rows as the number of coordinates in our points and the same number of columns. And in all of these rows and columns, we get the products of the combinations of the coordinates. So if we add this for all the points, this is the scatter matrix, which is an unscaled version of the covariance matrix, which has these products that basically tells us something about the covariance between the different coordinates of our data. And now we want to find the directions, the vectors that when transformed by this matrix, this S matrix, retain the same direction. So so to speak, the directions where this matrix used as a transformation just stretches the coordinates. So these are the eigenvectors of the matrix. So to do this, we can take our data, we take the middle point of our data, the mean of our data, we create a new matrix with these dimensions that are as many rows as the coordinates and as many columns as the coordinates, as the dimension where we are working with. So in this case it's 3 because we have the points in 3 dimensions. And now we add to this matrix this operation. We from each vector we subtract the mean. We create a column vector with this reshape. So we are reshaping this into a matrix that has 3 rows and 1 column. And we now add the product of this matrix with the transpose of the matrix. So using the algebraic product between the two matrices, we get this 3 by 3 matrix that we're going to add to this scatter variable and basically do this operation, adding all these products of the vectors. So now what we have is this scatter matrix that is basically a multiple of the covariance matrix, where you have these different values indicating dispersion in different directions. And we can compute the eigenvectors using this solver from NumPy. So we get the eigenvectors from this linear algebra module, and the eigenvalues are these scaling factors here. So by how much the matrix is stretching the vector in that direction, and the eigenvectors are the directions which correspond, which respect this equation here. That is, if we take those vectors in those directions and multiply the matrix by them, we get a vector that is in the same direction. So the vector does not rotate, does not change direction. So these are the 3 eigenvectors, the 3 eigenvalues, and now we can take the 2 largest eigenvalues, this one and this one, to indicate as indicative of the directions where we have most of the variance. So to illustrate this in this case, these are the 3 eigenvectors that we computed. This one is has the largest eigenvalue because it's in the direction of the largest dispersion of the points. Then we have the other 2 which are very similar, but we can now take the first one and the last one. So these are the ones with the largest eigenvalues, 53 and 183, and we can plot our data. We can transform our data into these 2 dimensions. So basically we are taking the 2 vectors, we are going to stack them in a horizontal matrix of 3 columns by 2 rows, and we're going to multiply that with the transpose of our data, and this is the equivalent of doing that rotation and projection into these 2 vectors. So the result that we get here with when we plot this is the result of plotting using one of these vectors, this large one, this one that's pointing in the direction of the largest spread, as the x coordinate, and the other vector as the y coordinate. So we get this here. We lost one dimension, we projected it into these two dimensions, but the one we lost is the one that had the smallest variance, and we retained the largest possible variance of this data set using this kind of linear transformation, so these rotations and projections. So this is what principal component analysis does. In practice, you're not going to compute the scatter matrix and do it like this. You can just import PCA from the decomposition module and then create a PCA object with the number of components that you want, fit your data, and then transform whatever you want. If you want to transform the same data, you can just call transform on your original data. If you want to check the actual components, the vectors, you can use this attribute. So this is one of the vector and the other one. These are the two directions that preserve most of the largest part of the variance in our data. So this is one way of extracting new features and combining features that we have in our data to extract a smaller number of features that are potentially more useful because we optimize the variance that we have in the final result here. This is not necessarily the best solution for all problems because in some cases the variance is not the most useful aspect that we would like to preserve, but this is a very widely used technique because it basically you don't need to know anything about target labels or correlations with values that you want to predict or things like that. It's strictly unsupervised. You just are doing this linear transformation to preserve as much as possible of the dispersion of your points. Another way of doing feature extraction and trying to learn this structure in your data is self-organizing maps. This is a kind of neural network that has quite a long history now. And we have the input dimension, so the input to the neurons is the input space. We are going to put our data, feed our data into the neurons. But the neurons are related to one another in a two-dimensional matrix. So we actually have, we can measure two distances between the neurons. We can measure the distance between the parameters of the neuron and some vector, for example, some example that we present to the network, and we're going to try to match the coordinates of the neuron in the parameters of the neuron as close as possible to some vectors. But then we also have the distance between neurons in this two-dimensional matrix. So the way we're going to train this is we're going to start at random. Our neurons start with small random numbers. And then we're going to present one example to our network and find the neuron that is closest to that example. That is, the neuron that has the set of parameters, the vector of parameters, closest to the vector of features in our example. And now we're going to move that neuron slightly towards the example. So the example is pulling the neuron, but we're also going to move the neurons that are connected to this best matching unit, to the closest neuron to the example. We're going to move its neighbors also slightly in the same direction. So if we look at this in a diagram, imagine that we have this randomly crumpled 2D array of neurons because they are placed at random in this space. But when we present the network with an example here, this is the neuron that is closest to the example, and this neuron is now pulled towards the example. And when this neuron is pulled towards the example, the neurons that are close to this neuron here in the matrix will also be slightly pulled in the same direction. So what happens is that eventually when we present many examples to the network and we keep reducing the size of these steps, eventually the network freezes in a way that the neurons are spread out across the cloud of examples, but they retain this neighborhood topology because of the way they are related inside this two-dimensional matrix. So you can imagine that we have a two-dimensional membrane of some elastic material, and we are spreading it out in n dimensions to try to approximate as much as possible the cloud of examples that we have in n dimensions. Okay, so let's see an example here. I'm using this Minisom library. If you want to try this code, you can download it, but this it's not very important, the code itself. Is just to understand what the self-organizing map is doing. And we're going to create a map of colors. So colors, we represent them in three dimensions, because we have the red channel, the blue channel, and the green channel. This would be, for example, black has 0 red, 0 green, and 0 blue. This is pure blue, 0 red, 0 green, and blue. This is gray, we have 0.5 of each. This is a lighter gray, and so on. So we have an array of many colors. These are our examples, and they are in 3 dimensions. We can also choose some names for all these colors so that we can then represent them. But this is our data in 3 dimensions. And now we're going to create a self-organizing map that has this 2-dimensional array of neurons. So this is the Minisom class, just to give you an idea of how it works. We can create a new self-organizing map specifying the size of the matrix of neurons. So how many in the horizontal by how many in the vertical. We specify the dimension of the input. So in this case, it's a 3-dimensional input. And then we have these parameters, learning rate, and so on. And then we initialize the weights. We give random weights to our neurons, and we train a batch by giving a batch of data, and we train the neurons sequentially by feeding it with the data examples. So let's see how we can do this. We're going to create a matrix of neurons that has 20 by 30 neurons. So we have 600 neurons in total in this 2-dimensional array. And we're going to randomize it initially using this dimension for our colors. And we're going to train by giving our colors and doing lots of iterations. So 10,000 times going through all these colors. And then we can plot the result by showing the image which is composed of the weights of the neurons. So we have these neurons, each neuron has 3 parameters, which is the 3 dimensions that we're using, and we can convert that into a color, because we have red, green, and blue for these 3 parameters. And we can also plot the text of the colors in this 2-dimensional space. So what we're doing here is learning a 2-dimensional representation of the 3-dimensional space of colors. Without going into much detail on the code, because that's really not the important part here, I can show you the result. So this is the color representation of the weights of the neurons, with the neurons represented in the matrix we created. So 30 neurons by 20 neurons. And we have a neuron here that was very close to cyan. Others here are close to sky blue, yellow, red, dark gray, and so on. So you can see that this matrix of neurons, which has two dimensions in this topology here that we are represented, each one of these corresponds to one point in the 3-dimensional space of colors that now we are mapping into 2 dimensions. So self-organizing map allows us to do this, map from a higher number of dimensions into 2 dimensions. Usually that's generally what they are used for, because they are used a lot for visualization. And so we can organize our data in 2 dimensions, even though the original data has more dimensions. And you see here the different colors related and going from one color to the other and so on. So let's see an example of feature extraction, a more practical example. There is this site I recommend, if you don't know it, to explore it, which is Gapminder. It has lots of indicators on country development for different countries. You can download the indicators. You can use the visualization tools in the site, which are very good too. And basically you can download these Excel files that have this kind of data. So for each indicator, for example, life expectancy, you have for each year and for all the countries what was the value in each year. So we have these data for GDP per capita, life expectancy, infant mortality, and employment over 15 years. And we're going to try to organize this to see how the countries are spread out according to these, to the evolution of these indicators. So when we look at a country and we look at the different data series, we can see that we have different numbers of points for different series. For example, this is for Portugal. We have data on GDP, on life expectancy, on the infant mortality and employment. And these are all different. We have points at different locations and we have different numbers of points. And if we look at different countries, we also have missing data in some countries, so that the number of points that we have in different countries is also different. So we cannot really take this data as it is and build a table and then do something with it directly, because we don't have those clean organized vectors that we are used to working with. So this is one example where we really need to do feature extraction before we can work with the data. So let's try one way of doing feature extraction. We want to solve the problem of converting each of these series of points into a fixed number of parameters that still gives us an idea of the evolution of these points. So for example, this is life expectancy in China over the years, how it progressed. This is infant mortality and so on. So we want to try to capture the shape of these curves, but not have different numbers of points for different countries, because that would be, we could not use that as vectors for our examples. So one simple way of doing this is to fit a curve here. Let's use polynomials. We can use polynomials of degree 3. For most of these curves, they seem to work fairly well. So if you have a polynomial of degree 3, these are 4 parameters that you need. And since we have 4 indicators, we are going to fit a polynomial to each one of those. We will extract 16 features from our data. So our data is very heterogeneous, the number of points and so on, but we can convert everything into 16 features for each country. 4 groups of 4, where each one is a polynomial of degree 3, showing the evolution of the country over the years. So this would be an example for Portugal. The gray ones are just the sum of all the countries that we have. And for Portugal, we have these, the GDP curve, the unemployment curve, the mortality curve, life expectancy, things like that. Okay? So we can use those points to create the polynomials. And now each country will have a set of 16 descriptors, 16 features that describe these different curves for the different countries. Okay, so now one problem is that with 16 dimensions, it's still too much to be able to visualize. We can do this, we can extract these 16 features from the sets of points on each country, but now we want to look at this into fewer dimensions, and so for this example, we can use the self-organizing map. So let's create a self-organizing map of 30 by 45 neurons, in this case. The number of features that we have here in the input is the 16 features that we have in our descriptors. We're going to initialize our network, then train with the number of batches. I just put down here in this text file a set of names of countries to plot in the representation at the end. So basically, what we do is we show the positions of the countries by checking which neuron is the closest one to the features of that country, so the descriptors we are using for that country, and then we draw the name of the country in the position of that neuron in the matrix. So this is what we get here. You can see that once we extract these features and then use some, we have United States, Germany, Austria here on this region, then Netherlands, Switzerland, Canada, United Kingdom. Then we have Portugal here, and then Kazakhstan and Cuba. I don't know if this is very good, but at least we are somewhere between these, and then Russia, Greece. And then we have I colored here the intensity of these cells according to how distance the neurons are from each other. So I'm using this distance map from the self-organizing map. So when we have these bright colors here, it means that the membrane is very stretched in this region, and the neuron here is very far away from the others. So this is Qatar. Qatar is a very small country with lots of oil, but a very recent development. So when you look at the way the curves are shaped over time in the development of the country, it's a very strange country compared to the others. So this is an example of how we went from data that is not very well structured, because we have different numbers of points in different examples and in different features and so on. We extracted a more organized set of features, 16 features for each country, and then we used self-organizing map to reduce everything to just these two-dimensional representation using the sum. Okay, so this is just an example of the idea of feature selection. You are going to do a bit of this on the second assignment, but this is not the main part of this course. It's just that it's very related to unsupervised learning, and it's a common task that you need to do. And the basic thing to retain here is mostly this idea of why we need to do feature extraction and feature selection, and why we need to do these dimensionality reductions. We're going to revisit this a bit later, but now I'm going to talk a bit about the first test. So for the next week, the lecture is going to be just for revisions and for questions. So there will be no streaming on YouTube. We'll only meet in the Zoom meeting at 4 o'clock, and then I'll answer your questions. As long as there are people there with questions, we can talk. For the first test, the subjects covered go to the lecture 12. So from lecture 1 through 12, including 12, which is boosting and the ensemble methods and so on. The test will be online, and what you need is basically internet access and webmail with your FCT Gmail account. So this is important, because this is what identifies you in the test, is your basically your clip password that you use for your email account, and you need to use the official FCT email account. So take care before the test to log out of any account that you may have on Gmail, and make sure that you're using the official one from FCT. During this week, I'm going to post a demonstration version and detailed instruction for the test. So you'll be able to experiment with the same mechanics of the test. You'll have pages that access each individual question, and then you answer the question by email by clicking a link that links to your Gmail account, and then you send the email from your Gmail account. But it's absolutely necessary that you log in with your official FCT Gmail account. The format of the test, it's going to have 5 questions. You have 10 minutes for each question, and then there's going to be a 5 minutes break between questions, so that you don't do everything in a contiguous sequence. We take 5 minutes breaks between questions. The questions will be deliberately designed to be too long for 10 minutes. So the idea is that it will be very hard to be able to answer everything that I'm asking in each question all the way to the end. But then when I'm grading the tests, I will take that into account and I will calibrate the grading given what in practice you manage to answer in general in these questions. So it's important that you answer in the same order as I am asking you to focus on different subjects. So one of the questions will ask you to explain several things. You do that in the same order that you have in the question, because those that are further later in the list will be worth less, and the first ones will be worth more, because I'll need to take into account how much you can actually answer in 10 minutes. This is a bit stressful and not very pleasant for you, but it's an important safety measure, because even though most students are honest and they are actually trying to do the test in a fair way, it's often tempting to help a colleague that needs assistance, or to ask for help from other colleagues and so on. But since you have to write as much as, or think about the answers and compose your answers carefully, answer as much as possible in those 10 minutes, anyone that is trying to communicate with other colleagues will end up being penalized, because they will not be able to do as much as they could do if they just focus on their own answer. So these are basically the reason for doing it this way is that I want to avoid contributing to spreading the disease. So I don't think it's responsible to have in-person tests given the situation we are in. But I also don't want to use intrusive methods and have cameras and proctoring systems and so on, because I don't think that it's reasonable to start to organize this under the assumption that students are not honest and are not being cooperating in the evaluation. However, there is this problem that if someone asks for help, we usually have the tendency to try to help, or if we are a bit stuck, we may want to ask for help from a colleague. So this mechanism makes it so that asking for help or giving help will actually have some cost and will be harmful for your grade. So there will be a penalization, because you cannot answer as much as you could if you were just concentrating. So in any case, I'm going to give detailed instructions about this, and we can talk about this today or next week. And I thank you all in advance for your cooperation in this, because it will be necessary for all of us to cooperate so that we have a fair test that can actually evaluate your knowledge. Okay, so to sum up this part, we saw the idea of feature extraction. This is very important if you have data sets that do not have these nice vectors of features all with the same size and ready to use. And then we saw PCA and self-organizing maps as ways of working with high-dimensional data and making it extracting the features that we need. So feature extraction in general can be done with many different techniques. PCA and self-organizing map are just two examples of how we can reduce dimensionality into fewer dimensions. We're going to revisit this later on under the umbrella of manifold learning. But in this particular case, we saw this example of the countries as a motivating example for extracting new features. So we took that messy data, we fit a set of curves, and we use the parameters of the curves as features in this example, and then also doing this dimensionality reduction to try to visualize the data. So you see here how we can combine supervised and unsupervised methods in trying to understand data when in fact we don't have actual labels that we're trying to predict. So these frontiers about what techniques to use when depend a lot on the actual problems that you're trying to solve. So you have tutorials on the scikit-learn for using PCA. If you want to learn more about self-organizing map, you can look at Wikipedia. This is an old neural network technique. By now there are more modern ones, but I was just showing this as an example because it's easy to understand the algorithm and it's good for visualization. Okay, so that's it for now. I'll just plug in the camera and log into to Zoom, and we can talk there. Okay. See you soon.